the assembly on Thursday.
World leaders have begun arriving at the U.S. economic hub city of New York in a partial return of the annual UN extravaganza despite COVID concerns, with progress sought on pressing global problems starting with the pandemic. U.S. President Joe Biden will address the General Assembly for the first time on Tuesday, then convene a virtual summit on COVID-19 a day later as he seeks to show U.S. leadership on vaccines. With the Delta variant triggering renewed infection spikes, Guterres warned that the world was heading in the wrong direction in all areas on the pandemic. Tanzania President Samia Suluhu is also expected to address the assembly, which will be attended majorly virtually by world leaders as part of moves to curb the spread of COVID-19 that continues to hit the nations. This is her first trip outside the African continent since she took over leadership of the United Republic of Tanzania on March 19, 2021. Also at the meeting, the issue of the Taliban's swift takeover is said to be a major topic of discussion at the United Nations, with Western powers pressing against recognition and looking to see the Islamists' track record on issues of concern, such as the rights of women. Meanwhile, Kenya is preparing to chair the United Nations Security Council with plans to use the opportunity to push solutions for enduring problems like terrorism and climate change. Kenya will be taking on a bigger task in October when it takes the presidency of the UN Security Council for the first time in 22 years. A rotational post, holders conduct and run meetings, and the agenda, besides representing the council in relating with other agencies and member states.
Elsewhere, whilst meeting with civil society organizations on the 16th of September, Mali's transitional prime minister alluded to a potential military partnership between his country and the Russian company Wagner, raising French concerns that potential Russian involvement would compromise their ongoing military operations in the country. According to the prime minister, Mali must broaden its potential for cooperation to bolster national defense in the face of international partners who alter their policy or have decided to leave Mali to withdraw to other countries.
Mis dans la même cellule que Omar Kanouté, membre du BC de l'IDPM, Muntagatal dans la même cellule à Koulikoro.
Tunisians gathered in the capital Tunis to protest against President Kais Said's power grab on July the 25th when he sacked the government, suspended parliament and removed lawmakers' immunity. Now, several hundred protesters marched through central Tunisia at the weekend to demand a return to parliamentary democracy. The march was tightly marshalled by security forces on the ground and an interior ministry surveillance drone overhead. Most of the protesters were supporters of the Islamist-inspired Ennahda party, which formed the largest bloc in parliament before its dissolution by the president. Back in the country, and the Nakuru West Sub-County Criminal Investigating Officers probing an incident where a medical doctor allegedly killed his two children and tried to take his own life have said they are giving the family time to mourn before continuing with the case and recording statements from persons of interest. Dr. James Gachanja, the owner of Optimum Hospital in Nakuru town, is alleged to have attempted to die by suicide on Saturday evening but was rescued and is currently receiving treatment at the Nakuru Level 5 Hospital. Ruth Sarmoi has more.
A day after the post-mortem of two children who were allegedly poisoned to death by their father was done and samples collected for testing at the government labs, the bodies of the two were today transferred from Kwajak Mortuary to PNN Morgue in Nakuru town. The police say they received a report at 10 p.m. on Saturday indicating that a tenant in Milimani Estate in Nakuru town was not accessible and had been seen getting into his house with his children at around 4 p.m. They say his wife, who had traveled to Nairobi at the time of the incident, had unsuccessfully tried to reach him on phone.
We took the initiative to visit the place at about 10:30 p.m. only to get that he had locked himself up in the house and we decided to break the house so that we could identify what actually was taking place.
Once they were in, James was found unconscious and was taken to hospital. However, his two children, a 5-year-old boy and a 3-year-old girl, were already dead.
There were assortment of drugs which had actually been used, and we highly suspect that the minors may have been either injected or given orally some drugs which may have caused the death, but this is subject to the opinion of the doctor.
According to the Nakuru County Police Commander Beatrice Kiraguri, a sharp knife was among the items that were collected by police at the scene of the incident. Dr. Gachara's siblings have refuted claims that their brother could be behind the death of his children.
Brother yangu ni mtu tu mwenye hapo na mwenye ana ubaya na mtu. Ni vigumu sana kukosana na mtu ama kukosea mtu. Na ni mtu anapenda familia yake sana. Kiwango anaweza kufa akipigania familia yake. Nimekuwa na marafiki wake. Wamenionyesha paka picha zenye walikuwa wamepiga nao that weekend akiwa na familia yake. They were so happy.
We just need to bring the pandemic.
Meanwhile, the Kenya Medical Practitioners and Dentist Union, KMPDU, has raised the alarm over what they term as mental health concerns among medics.
On 12th of June, we had a similar case where one of the doctors died by suicide at Kenyatta National Hospital parking lot. These sad incidences are just a tip of the iceberg on how the society, that is doctors not excluded, is grappling with mental issues.
For now, the police say that they are giving the family time to mourn the two minors as they piece together events that led to the unfortunate incident.
At the time of the incident, they have a house girl who was absent, and she had been instructed to go to another residence which is also occupied by the said father to these kids.
Dr. Gachara is still admitted in the ICU at the Nakuru Level 5 hospital. Ruth Sarmoi, NTV, Nakuru.
Now, elsewhere, with a bump up from the list of countries considered to be part of a red list, diplomatic ties between Kenya and the UK seem to be taking a different trajectory following the recent directive from the UK considering those vaccinated in South Africa, South America, Turkey, India, the UAE, Thailand and Russia as unvaccinated and must quarantine for 10 days. This comes as questions have emerged considering the vaccine exercise in the country, with stakeholders terming it as a diplomatic bias which may affect efforts to achieve herd immunity. The Ministry of Health still maintains that the vaccines that Kenya is receiving are up to standard.
The United Kingdom moved Kenya from its red list to amber along with several other countries after it revised its COVID-19 travel list starting 22nd of September 2021. In a statement on its official Twitter handle, the British High Commission in Kenya said, and I quote, "It is great news that Kenya is off the UK's red list for tourism, our economies and our people. We've had some questions about vaccine certification and the rules for countries on the amber list. People travelling from Kenya to the UK will no longer be required to hotel quarantine. We are committed to working with Kenya and other countries on the UK amber list on vaccine certification." This news was a big relief for travellers from Kenya into the UK, but questions about vaccine certification and rules for countries on the amber list upset many. The Ministry of Health maintains that the vaccine process in the country is valid and is urging WHO to intervene and clear the confusion.
Now, let me start by really saying it is to do with the certification, not the process, not the quality of our vaccination program. For us, we have got quality assured vaccines. Our program is meeting all the standards in terms of cold chain. And we have already started seeing the good impact of vaccination program in terms of reducing people who are who are developing severe disease.
Earlier, the United Kingdom had announced that one may not be considered to be fully vaccinated for the purpose of entering the UK, even if one has been fully vaccinated in the country of origin.
And let me also just say that I've read this in social media. I don't have any official communication yet. But from what I'm reading in the social media, it has a lot more to do with certification. So for me, it is a matter of government departments that deal with international relations to be the ones to solve that matter.
The UK is a major contributor to COVAX as it has distributed a huge number of vaccines across the world, with Kenya receiving 817,000 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine from the UK government through its bilateral relations. However, the World Health Organization has also been put on the spot to issue regulations on which vaccines should be considered standard across the world.
Obviously, in a pandemic, nobody expected, but we must have common standards. So the issue is, what will be the global accepted information on a vaccination certificate? I think this is a dialogue that will be best done through the World Health Organization as a global body looking into the health matters, so that every country then is informed what is required in those certificates.
On the other hand, Kenyans have been urged to continue with the vaccine uptake to achieve herd immunity with availability of multiple vaccines in play. Helen Aura, NTV.
Well, still staying with health matters and now focusing on our conversation of the day. Remember, we're talking about childhood cancers. Just a reminder of that question of the day to you is, are you a caregiver to a child living with cancer? What is the greatest challenge in accessing healthcare? Talk to us. That hashtag is new normal. And remember, you can also reach us using the numbers at the bottom of your screen for any questions and, of course, your contribution to the conversation of the day. And to help us understand better the impact of childhood cancers in this country, we are joined by a panel that actually knows how this shoe pinches. And I'll start off with Dr. Doreen Karemi, who is a pediatric hematologist and oncologist at the Gertrude's Children's Hospital. She joins us virtually. We are also joined by Dr. Werimo Moko, who is a caregiver herself, an ENT surgeon, but actually, for purposes of this conversation, she is a caregiver to a child who is living with nephroblastoma. And also joining us is Esther Mwangi, who is a caregiver to a child who had leukemia. You will hear her story in a moment. And also joining us, yes, we have a gentleman, Louise Indimuli, who is a caregiver to a child who is also living with leukemia. Thank you all for being part of this conversation. But before we get to it, let's shed light on the facts surrounding childhood cancers in this country. And to start us off, 300,000 children aged 0 to 19 are diagnosed with cancer annually globally. And these are statistics according to the WHO, that is the World Health Organization. 2,500 of those children are diagnosed in Kenya every day. Now, the common cancers when it comes to childhood cancers are leukemia, brain and spinal cord tumors, neuroblastoma, Wilms tumor, which is also known as nephroblastoma, and lymphomas, including both Hodgkin and non-Hodgkin. You will hear more about these in a moment. Now, some of the common symptoms associated with childhood cancers are child needs blood, bone pain, abdominal swelling, bleeding in the skin or nose, persistent headaches and vomiting, especially in the morning, and not gaining weight. Now, here are some other chilling statistics around childhood cancers. Cancer is a leading cause of death for children, and every 3 minutes a child dies of cancer worldwide. Now, more than 3,000 children actually die of cancer in this country every year. Now, when it comes to the outcomes associated with childhood cancers, this gets even more concerning. 4 out of 5 children with cancer in high-income countries are cured. 1 out of 5 children with cancers in low-income countries are cured. Clearly, you can see the discrepancy, and we'll be talking more about that in a moment. Now, as I said, our panelists know how that shoe pinches, and I'll start off with Dr. Karemi. 300,000 children aged 0 to 19 are diagnosed with cancer annually. That is a huge number. What is feeding into this burden?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much, Gladys, for inviting us in this special month We'll call it the Golden Month because this is a time we raise a lot of awareness about childhood cancer. And more importantly, it's a month of hope because as you have rightly put out the statistics, you can see they are very harrowing for countries in low and medium income countries. And our big challenges have been that we really have a lot of late presentation. I know people have had to think about those 300,000 new cases every year, and also to add on to that, 80% of those 300,000 cases are actually in low and medium income countries. That means childhood cancer is really a disease that we need to focus on as low and medium countries and put a lot of urgency into how we handle it. These numbers, if you look at it comparing to adult cancers, is really, you'll notice that childhood cancer is it's a rare disease, and being rare probably is a big reason why we haven't had too much focus on it. We also estimate that in Kenya, I know you got the statistics saying that we only have about 2,500 cases, but when we look at the population estimates, we should be diagnosing about 6,000 to 7,000 new cases every year. What that means is that we are almost missing about almost 60% of the childhood cancer cases that we should be diagnosing in Kenya. Now, if you look at it comparing to adult cancers, childhood cancers are just about a tenth of the total cancer burden, but really, childhood cancer is a curable disease, and that you said very rightly, that more than 80%, and that is in general, of childhood cancer diseases can be cured, meaning a child who had leukemia can actually go on to have complete resolution of their leukemia and continue to live a fruitful life for the rest of their lives. So this is very important to us. Let us raise awareness. Let us save our children.
All right, that is a very good way to kickstart this conversation because it highlights the gaps that we need to look into and, of course, the stakeholders involved to do much more and help our children. Now, even as we talk about the common cancers, as I had listed them, we had a couple of them, 5 of them to be precise, but of course that list goes on to 10 if you were to look at the top 10. Why these cancers and why children? Dr. Karembi?
Childhood cancer.
Yes.
Yes. If you look at childhood cancer, it's a big group of diseases. Depending on some of the tissues that are developing, what is different between adults and children is that a lot of their tissues are developing. And as they are dividing, there's always a risk of mutation. So some of the rapidly dividing cells in the body would be like, for example, the ones that are in the blood system. So you notice leukemias in general tend to be very common in children. They are the commonest cancers in children. Then we tend to have the lymphomas. And then we also tend to have the Wilms tumor, or what you call the nephroblastoma. And we have the eye cancer that is called retinoblastoma. Then we tend to have now the other muscle and bone tumors, which we call the sarcomas. Now, some of these childhood cancers are very unique to children, and the only reason they are very unique to children is because some of their tissues are developing, they are growing, they are dividing, and as they do that, then they risk the chance that they could get a mutation and possibly develop into cancer.
Okay, now you have rightfully listed that leukemia makes to the top of that list, and we have a representation of caregivers amongst us. So let us understand this disease a little bit more, and we'll start off with, as I said, acute lymphocytic leukemia. I'm hoping that I'm actually pronouncing it well, and it is actually abbreviated as ALL. Now, this is also known as acute lymphoblastic leukemia, and it's a type of cancer of the blood and bone marrow. Now, it is the most common type of cancer in children, and treatments and result in a good chance for a cure, and can also occur in adults, though the chance of a cure is greatly reduced. Now, some of the symptoms, as you see on the screen: bleeding from the gums, bone pain, fever, frequent infections, frequent or severe nosebleeds, lumps caused by swollen lymph nodes in and around the neck, armpits, abdomen, or even the groin. Now, also pale skin, shortness of breath, weakness, fatigue, or a general decrease in energy as some of the symptoms associated to this leukemia. And speaking of which, as I mentioned, Esther is actually a caregiver to a son who had leukemia. Now, I'm using past tense. Tell us your story, Esther.
Good morning, Gladys, and thank you for inviting me to the show. My little boy, Al, got diagnosed with leukemia in 2017. And as you've said, some of the symptoms is the swellings around the neck. So he presented with swollen lymph nodes around the neck. I didn't know what it was at the time, so which was obviously concerning because you could visibly see them. And that was the start of a long 4-year battle with leukemia.
Okay. And you say he had swellings in the neck. When you noted they were not, the usual, what did you do?
When I noted the swellings, I went to a physician, and they said that that's an indication of a compromised immune system. So, and there are other diseases which present sort of in a similar manner. So they started eliminating from the most common to obviously the least common, which was the cancer. But at the time, when they did what they call an FNA, which is fine needle aspiration, where they draw some fluid from the swelling, we got a false negative and thought it was just something, maybe a bug, a virus, and I was told to boost his vitamins, like more fruits and veg, and we just carried on as normal, only for the swellings to sort of get bigger, reduce in numbers, and spread to more places in about 2 months. So in February, the first tests were done in December 2016. Yeah, so in February 2017, I went back to the physician because now the swellings were particularly behind the ears, like really big, sort of, and the armpits and the groin area. And the doctor said, now we have to get one of them out and test. That was in Nakuru. And when he went in for a surgery to remove one of the lymph nodes and to send to the lab, a grueling 3 weeks waiting for the results. And finally, when the results came, they said, I think you need to go to Nairobi because this is more than we can handle. And we were referred to a specialist in Gertrude's.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. As I mentioned, I am referring to Al in past tense.
Yes.
Talk about the journey after.
Yeah. After that, he got treatment in Gertrude's for the whole year, 2017. And by end of the year, we were told that he's in remission, which was good news, but he had to carry on with treatment, and there were some tests which I had been advised to keep checking, signs of relapse, because they say the cancer cells sometimes can hide. They have sanctuary sites, mostly in the brain, because it's really well protected, in the spine, and also for boys, sadly, in the testicles. And because he got radiation for he got chemotherapy and radiation in 2017, but he got a testicular relapse because it's not standard for them to do a radiation in that area. So, but they had told me how to keep an eye. And 2 years later, in 2019, we noticed the enlargement, and I went back to Daktari, and they did further tests, and they said the cancer was back, and we had to go back to the beginning. And then, because they don't have relapse protocols in Kenya, like to treat when cancer is back, he needed more specialized treatment, and we had to go to India for a stem cell transplant, which he got. We were in India for 9 months and came back, faced challenges because the transplant took long to take effect. And he did recover despite the challenges. And by September last year, that's 2020, he was on a really good trajectory, and we were really hopeful. But sadly, in February the 19th this year, he took his last breath, and yeah, so...
I understand this is a difficult story to tell. It's still fresh. It's only February of this year, and we condole with you, but we thank you for being here to create awareness around childhood cancers. Now, ALL is something also that Louise is very familiar with because his own daughter actually suffers from the same. Louise, is what Esther is saying resonating with you to some extent?
Yeah, first of all, every time we have a chance to speak, we always honor Al, because Al fought very bravely. We followed Esther's story for quite some time, so we always honor that situation, and yes, it does. So yeah, Zuri got unwell in 2018, and then diagnosed in 2019, ALL. Yeah, so similar story. We just finished chemo last month. Thankfully, on our case, she responded well, and so we are grateful that she's still with us.
Okay, and at this point, I'm curious to know, you get a diagnosis of ALL. Is this the first time you're hearing cancer in your family?
Oh yeah, so that's the thing about cancer, like it's just this very seemingly distant thing you keep hearing about, and then one day you're just thrust into it. So most times we assume it's something else. But then, and we always pray that the effects that you're seeing are not really cancer, but you never really cross your mind that it could be cancer until the time that you're actually told it is. And you begin a very, very long journey. No one actually ever plans for it, wishes for it, or even thinks about it until it's part of your family. Especially, no one ever thinks of it happening to your own child.
And you say most often than not, you miss it or don't even want to believe it could be cancer in your case. What did you think it was, or what were you told the first time around?
So Zuri is very light-skinned, but then she began getting much, much more pale. She was, of course, very tired all the time. She withdrew to herself. She began just not being herself. Even her personality kind of changed. But then we knew something is off when her stomach began getting bigger. That's because now the liver was really overworking. So because she had just begun school about a month or so ago before we noticed she's not very okay, we thought maybe this is thought, school bags that kids, pick up. We even thought maybe, she's not eating so well. So we thought it could be a myriad of so many other things, but never really cancer. And even the first couple of tests, we were told maybe just put her on blood boosters or give her more rest, but we could tell something is off, especially because of her skin color. She became extremely light-skinned, like even actually to the point of being pale. And any touch to the skin would leave her bruising. That's because she was not clotting well enough. And of course, like I mentioned, the stomach began getting big, and you could feel something very hard on the side of it because now the liver was really enlarged because of overworking to clean the blood. And so that's when we went to hospital. First we went to Thika, here where we live. And then that same night, I think the doctor just sort of panicked and said, guys, for these test results, even if we wait until tomorrow, nothing much we can do. Please run to either Aga Khan or to Gertrude's. And so we ran to Gertrude's and we began the treatment the very next day.
Okay, I'll pose the same question to you, Esther. Was this the first time you were coming across cancer in your family?
Yes, it is. It was, rather.
Okay.
Yeah, it was the first time. And It was actually quite shocking, especially having gotten a false negative at the first, lot of tests. But it's what it is, and the journey was not optional. So we just had to mark in and fight as hard as we could.
All right. Now, we'll hear more of this story in a moment, but Dr. Karimi, there is some science that you need to help us out with. First of all, they both say that misdiagnosis was also one of the things they had to deal with, especially Esther, they had a false negative. Is this something that you see in your line of work?
Yes, Gladys, that happens a lot. Like I mentioned before at the beginning, is that childhood cancer is really a rare disease. And unfortunately, also childhood cancer doesn't have any specific symptoms. You notice that a lot of the symptoms the parents described were really shared with other diseases. So you'll notice a child just becoming more fatigable, having looking paler than normal, and you can almost explain it with other diseases. For example, you see fever, persistent fever is one of the symptoms of cancer in children. You find any swelling, and I say any swelling, sometimes it could be an acute infection, but I always say if it persists more than 2 weeks, really you need to have it biopsied and you really need to have it checked out for cancer. Some tummy swelling, a lot of the times most parents will come in telling you that oh, my baby's tummy looks a little big, and it could be because either there's something growing in there or the organs inside the tummy are actually getting bigger because of cancer. And bone pain, and I always say any bone pain that wakes up a child in the night is already a red flag. Something is going on, it needs to be evaluated. You rightly said headache. You can imagine how many things can cause headache. It can be malaria, it can be typhoid, it can't even be just a flu. But if it persists for more than 4 weeks and consistently a child wakes up, says, Mommy or Daddy, I have a headache. And sometimes it will be accompanied by a vomit, and then they go to school, spend the day, and they're fine. For the retinoblastoma, I know we've raised awareness about it. It's really simply a white reflex, like what we'd see like with a cat's eye reflex when you shine a torch. And basically those subtle signs, and that's why we really need to raise awareness amongst caregivers, amongst healthcare workers, because you have to have a high index of suspicion. Because most of these symptoms, none of them will really tell you this is leukemia, this is Wilms tumor. You have to really put them together and say they don't make sense. I think I need to have this child evaluated.
Okay, now before we hear more about Wilms tumor, let's go back to the fact that this condition, ALL, can be called lymphoblastic or lymphocystic. Explain to us this in layman.
All right, so I think the right name is actually lymphoblastic. So blastic is what we see in children. Lymphocytic is a more mature type of leukemia, and we don't see it in children, we see it in adults. Anytime you hear blastoma, blastic, it really sort of tells you that the tissue is immature, and most of the cancers we see in children will be retinoblastoma, nephroblastoma, lymphoblastic. So it's almost indicating that there's a bit of immaturity in the cells that we are seeing. So it's a typo, but that's understandable, yes.
Okay then. So let's look at nephroblastoma, which is also known as Wilms tumor. If you can have that, those graphics on screen. It is a rare kidney cancer that primarily affects children. It's the most common cancer of the kidneys in children. It affects children aged 3 to 4 and becomes much less common after the age of 5. Now, some of the symptoms that are associated with nephroblastoma include an abdominal mass you can feel, abdominal swelling, abdominal pain, fever, blood in the urine, nausea or vomiting or both, constipation, loss of appetite, shortness of breath, and high blood pressure. So, Dr. Moko, you have a child that has survived a nephroblastoma. What is your story?
Okay, thank you so much, Gladys, for inviting us here today, and our condolences. We honor Al today. For me, my story began in 2017. Earlier on in the year, we just put my son, to play group, and we noted that he had started losing weight. He started vomiting on and off, like the teacher would write in the diary that he vomited. And initially we thought it was because of the new school environment. So we actually didn't think it would be anything serious. But then we also started noting that his abdomen started getting bigger. And at that point is when we sought medical care. Before then, we had also tried to seek care. We had tried to see the pediatrician because of the weight loss and the loss of appetite. But then we thought it was issues to do with school. And we had tried even looking for a nutritionist to advise us on what to do so that we can avoid the weight loss. So when the abdomen now started swelling is when we sought medical care at MP Shah Hospital. And on that day, the 13th of June in 2017, is when he got diagnosed with nephroblastoma. It was actually at stage 4. He had some metastasis, which is some of the cancer tissues had spread to his lungs. But immediately after the diagnosis, we chose to go to Aga Khan Hospital on the same day, and we started treatment on the next day. And fortunately, or we can say we thank God, he's now 7 years old. We've been 2 years in remission. We are still on the journey where we keep following up to see whether he's going to have a recurrence, but so far God has been graceful and on our side, and we are hoping that it's going to remain that way, and we thank God for it.
And we pray so too. So tell me this, they give you a diagnosis, you're a doctor, cancer is something that you hear in your line of duty. What was your reaction?
To be honest, when the abdomen started swelling, when I noted the abdomen swelling, initially I went through a stage of denial because I knew that was a red flag. And I chose to take him to hospital on Monday. So the whole weekend I just sat in the house and I was just praying because I knew this is a ticking time bomb. And so unfortunately, no one ever prepares you for the day you'll be on the other side of the seat or the other side of the table where you're being given a diagnosis of your child having cancer. That nobody ever dreams of that day. So of course, when it was confirmed, it was heartbreaking. But also, I also thank God for the knowledge that I had in my medical school, because me knowing that it was a nephroblastoma, first I knew that it is a cancer that has a very good prognosis. So even at stage 4, I knew my son could get cure. And from that, I think I went into survival mode, and I knew now I have to fight for my son, and I have to act as fast as possible to make sure that he gets treatment, because I had seen that you can actually get cure from it. And that is what pushed me to seeking medication. The following day, he actually started his chemo on this first day after his diagnosis.
Okay, was this the first time you're hearing of cancer in your family?
In the family, yes, it was the first time.
Okay, Dr. Karemi, all these panelists actually say they heard of cancer for the first time through their children. What are the causes of childhood cancers? Are they genetically predisposed or environmental factors?
All right, that's a very good question, Gladys, because most parents, of course, as you hear when they're told their child has cancer, it is almost like the end of the world for them. And the first thing that they go through is to ask you, doctor, what did I do wrong? What causes cancer in my child? Because we know in adult cancers, you'll always hear, for breast cancer, because you're female, exposure to hormones, maybe family history. You look at cancer of the cervix, you're told an exposure to HPV. But we really say childhood cancer has no known risk factors. And 95% of the time, we really don't know what was the cause of the cancer. However, there's still a 5 to 10% chance that 5 to 10% of these cancers that have a genetic predisposition. For example, that question you've kept asking, is there a family history, is a very important question, because some of these children, you discover your grandfather had prostate cancer, your mother has had breast cancer, you have an auntie who has had maybe a brain tumor. That is already telling us there's a cancer predisposing syndrome in that family. So a lot of the times, there's nothing parents have done. It's most likely a new disease in the family, but there are certain cancer predisposing syndromes that we really need to be aware of. And as doctors, those are the patients we need to regularly screen to be able to identify if they've gotten any of those cancers that they're likely to get.
Okay, and Dr. Karemi, nephroblastoma affects children aged 3 to 4 and becomes less common after 5. Explain this.
So as you rightly pointed out, the blastoma, you notice that blastoma is a cancer of maturing tissue. So what happens is that most of the time, these tissues are matured by the age of 5. That is not an absolute. Sometimes we still find these blastomas, these tissues, these immature tissues can persist even up to adulthood. We've had an adult at 54 years of age get nephroblastoma, which is really a cancer of childhood, but that is rarer. So these tissues, the immature tissues, that they're going through their maturation, sometimes are the ones that can get. And that's why some of these tumors, you only see them in children. You will never hear about them in adults.
Okay, now we take a short break here on Your World. When we return, I had earlier mentioned that childhood cancers not only affect the health of the child, but actually have huge ripple effects amongst the family members. We'll hear more of the stories from our panelists this morning, even as we understand how best the system, the healthcare system, can actually support them. We'll be right back.
A place in your heart.
Oh my gosh! Are you all right? Do you need anything?
Audrey!
Stay away from me.
Hey,
stay away.
Tell Sean about this, I'll tell my mother to hurt that vegetable you call your mother-in-law.
What's going on? What happened
Sean,
here?
Well, Audrey here, her phone fell into the pond earlier. She fell into it while she was trying to get her phone. I'm just glad I was here. Are you okay?
A place in your heart.
Lucozade. Energy to get through it.
Customer preferences are changing daily. You wake up one day, an innovation has come up and the customer wants a service in a way that you've not delivered before. Textbook Center aims to provide service, products and solutions that exceed our customers' expectations. Partnering with Sandy Transport ensures that we are able to deliver on our promise of being more than a bookshop.
Did you know at Ruiru Mabati Factory, we offer free delivery within the same day? Did you know at Ruiru Mabati Factory, you can open an account and lipa pole pole at your convenience? Did you know at Ruiru Mabati Factory, you can get customized sizes according to your roof plan to avoid wastage? Call us now on 0111 050 700. Ruiru Mabati Factory, mali safi kwa bei poa.
Kuwa smart na ujaribu Zenka 0% loans for first-time borrowers. Zenka, smart loans for smart people.
I'm growing up, I'm growing into every moment. So if
Nurture the moment. Minute Maid Nutri Defenses, fortified with vitamin E and zinc to help improve your defense system.
AMRC's objectives are aligned with the government's affordable housing pillar of the Big Four agenda. Visit any of the participating financial institutions today and start your home ownership journey. Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company, unlocking liquidity for affordable housing.
Thank you for staying with Your World. My name is Gladys Gachanja. Today, the conversation is childhood cancers, and we are doing this in honor of the Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. And helping us along with this conversation, Dr. Doreen Karimishi is a pediatric hematologist oncologist at the Gertrude's Children's Hospital. Also joined by Dr. Werimo Moko, who is a caregiver to a son who is living with nephroblastoma, and also Esther Mwangi, who is a caregiver to a son who had leukemia, and Louise Indimuli, also a caregiver to a daughter living with leukemia. Thank you all for being part of this conversation. And when I went to break, I mentioned that the impact of childhood cancers is not only on the child in terms of his health, it also has ripple effects to the family members. Now, Esther, you talked about diagnosis, the different treatments, relapses, having to leave the country and all that. There is a lot of stress coming out of this, a lot of financial strain, and definitely hope against hope that the child will be well. Then unfortunately he actually passes on. Talk about that experience and what it does to a caregiver.
Well, it is an emotional roller coaster. So you have a lot of highs and lows, and mostly lows on the journey. You have to be there for the child. You have to also be the thinker, especially because I was the only parent at the time looking after him. And you have the children. So I have a second boy who is older than Al, called Jack. And at the time of diagnosis, Al was 4 and Jack was just about to turn 7. So 2 small children. And also the fact that I don't live in Nairobi, a lot of driving on the highway, and yeah, really tough.
Yeah.
Then at the same time, cancer treatment is not cheap.
Yeah.
So you start the treatment and you're told the cost of it. You get like 600,000 from the NHIF, and then the medical cover is depleted within maybe 2 cycles of chemo. And you're faced with maybe getting no access to care. But then luckily I have very good friends and very supportive colleagues and employer, and they all jumped in and started fundraising. So yes, I worried about that, but at least there were people who were carrying it forward. And just seeing your child go through hell, you have to hold him down for them to prick him and draw blood samples or give him medication. And unlike Daktari here, I'd never been to some of these places in hospital. You go to the theater, you have to tear your child away and give them to strangers who later became friends, the doctors, for surgeries. And you're sitting there for hours hoping against hope that they will give you back your child from the theater. Then, like the chemos, they tell you outrightly, this is poison, really, because it's not your everyday drugs. And they wear gloves, they wear masks, they protect themselves from these drugs, and this is what they're putting in your child. So it could go horribly wrong in a second. So you're crossing your fingers and praying all the time. So you can't sleep at night. I remember when I was in India, I could not sleep at all because of the physical stress, the emotional, all of it. I could not fall asleep before 4 a.m. And I had to get up at 6 to do his medication. So at one point, my body just gave in, and I had to go see doctors for my own health. Yeah, it is not easy.
Okay,
Yeah.
you talked about the cost of treatment being very high.
Yeah.
In retrospect, cumulatively, approximately perhaps, how much did it come to?
The total of all the treatment from 2017 to the time of Al taking his last breath was approximately 30 million. Yeah,
in 4 years?
In 4 years, including the transport. And that probably does not include the little costs like transport and dietary changes. That is the money which is directly related with the treatment. The paying for the chemotherapy, the drugs, because the drugs are quite expensive as well. Like when we came back from India, his drugs were costing about 500,000 a month because he was on immunosuppressants, he was on antibiotics, he was on some blood boosters, he was on antivirus, he was on everything, really. Talk of a drug, and chances are I have come across it.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Louise, that journey sound familiar?
Unfortunately, yes. Unfortunately, I think for Al's case, we always treat him as a hero because he really fought. And I think most of us, in terms of families, we just never can grasp how much we actually spend doing this treatment. It's figures which, when we look back, we wonder where did that money all come from. In some cases, we are happy that the child made it, but then what people need to understand is that it changes a family's financial trajectory for quite a long time. Recovering from that is never easy. And like Esther said, it's a roller coaster of emotions. The deepest despair you can think of, but also the highest of hopes during those small miracle moments. And I think for us, we tend to experience life in extremes as caregivers. So like when you're extremely sad or extremely happy, when a miracle comes through, when you get a good report, or when you do a fundraiser and all your friends and colleagues contribute and you pay off a bill. So we do experience a lot of extremes. Sadly, there is not so much research into how deep actually the trauma gets or goes. We can only speak for one, like your own experience. And then I think also what Esther was trying to allude is that sometimes when you're given this diagnosis, there's not so much support system that you can draw from. There's not so much prior experience or networks that used to be there. Now we're building them slowly as caregivers because information is power. And I think, I don't know if you knew how to put up this panel, but this is like a very nice small get together with my doctor and Esther, who are in part of that particular circle. We are very close, and I think we're building this as we go so that more parents get information as that time when they're given that diagnosis. So it's not so much of a dark period. So you don't just deal with the emotional pain, but we kind of give sort of guidelines. Esther was the very first person to actually call me when she found out about the diagnosis, amongst the very first ones. So what we're trying to actively do in the month of September is to give as much information, because this helps when someone understands the kind of journey or challenges that are ahead, then you can compartmentalize and deal with the emotional trauma separately, but also the more you do the work, the better you feel about what you're trying to accomplish. So you will have the highs and the lows, but information is something that's very critical to help parents actually cope with this beginning journey of a caregiver, because it's completely clueless. No one knows where the money will come from. But we do have to thank some instances where the government comes in and NHIF, there's some associations, there's some programs that we're learning to archive and kind of just give those as solutions or as options to parents when they come in.
Okay, and that experience is not unique to the layman. Dr. Moko here, medical doctor, but you still went through the same roller coaster, right?
Yes, it's, as I said, doctors are actually human beings. And being a doctor doesn't exempt you from other things that could happen to anybody else out there in the society. And so, as both parents said, it's actually an emotional roller coaster, because you will move, in spite of my knowledge, I actually found myself also having a lot of sleepless nights, especially on the times that you'd be admitted in hospital. And you know, sometimes you have to gauge, there's the knowledge that you know, and then at the same time there's the reality that you're facing, and you know that also some of the realities are very scary during that period. And the worst thing is that most of the times the children are young. My son was only 3.5 years. He had started school, he used to love school, and all of a sudden he had to stop going to school, and we had to spend a lot of time in hospital. And the worst thing for the parent is to go through that experience for your child, and you have to explain to the child what's happening. When the hair falls off, you have to tell them why the hair is falling off, you know, and it's very scary for them. And that is one of the most devastating things, because you know the reality, but you have to shield the child from some of those scary moments. You have to explain to them why they have to keep getting pricked all the time, why you have to keep going to hospital all the time. Sometimes the treatment is prolonged. Like for me, my son went through chemotherapy, surgery, chemotherapy again, and then radiotherapy. And so you can imagine there's a point which we were in hospital for a whole month. And now you have to, the child actually even asks you if this is your new home, because they don't understand what's happening. And so that really drains you emotionally. And the same thing for financially. It also is quite a burden to the family. And I thank God for the National Hospital Insurance Fund, the NHIF, because I'm also one of the greatest beneficiaries of NHIF. I don't know how we would have pulled it financially if we didn't have the NHIF cover, because the private insurances give you a very small amount. And the minute it is cancer, it is very difficult for you to renew that private insurance. In spite of the fact that it is childhood cancer and it is curable, we tried using those appeals, but once you deplete your insurance after the diagnosis, you don't get a renewal. And so it's not any different for anyone.
Wow. Dr. Karimi, let's go back to some of those statistics that we shared earlier on. The outcomes especially. 4 out of 5 children with cancer in high-income countries are cured. 1 out of 5 children with cancer in low-income countries are cured. Kenya falls in that category. Now, we are saying the treatment clearly is a bigger impediment to accessing healthcare, and of course is also alluded to delayed diagnosis or even onset of treatment. Talk about the impact of this.
All right. So I really want to just appreciate these caregivers when they speak. You know, as doctors, sometimes you never quite really understand what they are going through. But I'm so happy that they support each other and just give each other that necessary guidance, because you've been through it, so you understand it better. So I really want to appreciate them. And now on to your question, Gladys, is that you notice our outcomes are very dismal. And what we attribute to that is really a lot of late presentation. And the late presentation comes in because a lot of these children are going through the healthcare system, really being diagnosed and treated for various other illnesses before somebody suspects that this could be cancer. So by the time they appear to you, you already have very advanced disease, stage 3, stage 4. And you notice advanced disease also carries a poorer prognosis. So basically, one late presentation is a huge challenge. Then we have very weak referral systems. You notice As for Esther, she had to travel all the way to Nairobi to get access to care. You can imagine all the people in Kenya are depending on a few facilities in Nairobi, maybe Eldoret and a few other centers now. So really, that is a huge challenge. We have also a huge burden on the financial aspect of cancer care. And that is something I wish, because you can look at how childhood cancer is already a very rare disease. And also on the other side, it also carries a very good prognosis because it's so curable. And if we catch them early, it's even better because then we don't have to give very intense therapy. So it would be so good if the government would invest in having children treated almost for free, because you can hear these children can survive and can lessen that burden on these families. So again, a big challenge we deal with is cultural myths. A lot of times people hear cancer, they imagine death, and it's so hard sometimes to actually even convince parents, let's treat your child. There is hope. Because they imagine that if this child really has cancer, all the people we know with cancer have not made it, I think my child will not make it. And really, we want to tell you in this September month, there is hope. Yes, there is hope. We can always do something for every patient. And childhood cancer is curable, but early detection, early diagnosis is actually what saves the lives of those children.
Now, Louise, Dr. Moko mentioned how difficult it is to just explain to the child what exactly is going on with them. And as much as you know the truth, you can only give them so much because they're still young. They cannot comprehend. Give us a perspective of how you handled Zuri.
I think Zuri was 3 years when, or just about to turn 4 when she got that diagnosis. And then Zuri has always kind of been a very quiet, introverted person. So initially we didn't really have a challenge explaining it to her. Of course, she was troubled every time going to hospital. And I think as a parent, the thing you're never prepared for is the amount of pain that you kind of witness in your own child. And so most times you find yourself just kind of not wanting to deal with it, especially on the side of the child. Zuri's mom, however, one of the strongest women I know, was able to really sort of just convey to her why we are doing. So for kids, sometimes they may not really understand what cancer is, but then if you explain to them why are we doing ABC, then they are more kind of comfortable, especially if they see hope and strength in their parents. So we always used to try so much not to break down or cry in front of her, both her mother and myself. And then also what we learned earlier on is that children are very resilient. In fact, something we used to, now we laugh about it now, like we would come out of a very horrible session and then when we get home, then Zuri watches her cartoons and she's back to laughing. And that's just because children, as soon as they kind of get back home, pain, we hang on to it more than they do. And then we learned to be courageous through just watching her and how resilient she actually is. So it gave us hope and told us, you know what, if she's able to handle this, if she's able to later on tell us that was a bad day, but now I'm home. And in fact, something else which I think it's important to note is that the importance of a home setup for kids, especially when they're going through these hospital issues. And so, having a conducive environment, clean, safe, but also happy. Sometimes we learn to put all the stress and all the distressing sort of images or even thoughts. We kind of learned to leave them outside of the door and then make sure when they're home, they're as happy as possible. So yeah, and even up to now, Zuri has really strengthened this thing in her that if you explain something to her why she's doing it, especially hygiene, diets, why she's not doing ABC, then they really completely understand, and she keeps it up to now.
Okay. And for you, Esther, I mean, I've read up on your story with Al, and he comes across that like this hero that lived amongst us because he fought, but he also did it with so much resilience. At what point did you actually break the news to him for him to understand what he was facing?
Okay, thank you. At the time, he was just about to turn 5 when he got his initial diagnosis. And when I went through the phase of running to the bathroom and crying and come back with my eyes red, and he would ask, "Mommy, why are your eyes red?" And I say, "Oh, I was washing my face and some soap got into my eyes," you know. When I managed to put it together after a few days, so I explained to him about this sickness, like the germs. I think I'd brought him up in a way that I talked to him about a lot of stuff, explaining and also being a teacher. I think that helps, being able to break it down to a child's level. So I explained to him that this nasty bug, leukemia, and he has to go through all this treatment, and he got it in his own little way.
Yeah.
And I told him we're going to fight it together, and we are a team, you know.
Okay, now he has an older brother who actually was his donor for the stem cell transplant.
Yeah.
How did you explain to the brother what was going on and why they had to remove something from his body to give it to his brother?
By the time we got to the transplant, we had already gone through a lot because having to access care in Nairobi meant that we were away sometimes for 2 months from away from Gilgil and in Nairobi, and Jack would be left under the care of other people. So he was already affected by the time we were coming to the transplant. And so when it got to the point where the leukemia came back and I had to break the news to them and tell them, sadly, this time we'll have to go to India and we have to get passports, we have to travel. I had to show them, both of them, videos of India, you know, to try and prepare them.
Yeah.
And of course, Jack was really, really anxious, and he luckily had a lot of support. And when we went to India, they said that they didn't need him at that time, so he had to fly back home and go back to school. And luckily he goes to school where I work, and the school just embraced him and looked after him. They became his family, his primary family. And the school counselors, everyone, all the staff were on hands and deck to just look after him and explain everything to him. And when he came over, when it was time to donate the stem cells, sadly, it felt like a holiday for him because he was going to get reunited with his mom and his brother after so many months of being away. Then, of course, there was the medical regime where he had to get injections to support his bone marrow to produce enough stem cells to donate to his brother, and it was a painful experience. And I think because of the difference in personalities with Al had already gone through so much, and even being knocked out, you know, anesthesia was quote unquote not a big deal for him because he had gone through so many, and all you had to tell him is, "Sorry, Al, we have another procedure." Breaking your heart, but you look at this little guy, he is just going for it. You know, he's high-fiving with the doctors. He knew the doctors by name, and if they're not doing it right, he would tell them that, "Oh, you know, this is what you do. You first wipe the skin, and then you do this and that." Dr. Karimi would tell you. He was a good friend of hers, and they had jokes. So unfortunately for Jack, it was a one-off, and he was really, really nervous. He took the anesthesia badly, not badly, like he didn't want to. The way it affected him, he was really panicking, and he couldn't settle. So you have 2 children there going through, you know, a hell of an experience, and your heart just keeps breaking.
Wow.
Yeah.
Dr. Moko, you talked about the difficulty of breaking it to your son. Did he get it?
I think he got it, but I think the proper impact of what he went through And what it was came out when he grew up a little bit, and he was 5 years. And now he would start asking me, why do we have to keep going to hospital on and off? Why have I been to hospital most times than other children? And sometimes he'd look at photos and ask me, how comes I didn't have hair at this time? But at that point, when we were breaking it to him, we just told him that there's a worm growing in his tummy, because he could feel the big tummy that was enlarging. And once it was removed, the hospital had very beautiful stickers with butterflies. And he was excited by the butterflies. And so the healing, children are just, they take news in a very different way. And I think the way they react is what gives you hope. And for my son, he's David, and I kept, I used the story of David and Goliath to relate to him. And I kept narrating it to him, and I was like, you know, you're David, and this big worm in your tummy was like Goliath, and so we have to keep coming to hospital so that we can fight it. And God is going to be with us as we fought it. But at 5 years is when I finally told him that it was actually cancer, because he now has he has an abdominal scar, and he has one kidney, and he has to understand how to take care of himself. He has to understand that he has to drink water more than other children. He has to understand that he can't stay in the sun for a very long time without hydrating, unlike other children, and such things. And also, he also has to understand the danger signs. If he's hit on the side where the other kidney is, he has to report to me. And so now that he's older, he's able to comprehend, he's able to understand. And I think with time they get to understand it, they get to get it. But I think initially he didn't comprehend, but he got it in his own way.
Wow. Okay. Clearly building resilience, but also information is power even for the little ones, you know, so that they know how to take care of themselves. We're about to take another short break here on Your World. But before we do, remember, I had posed that question of the day to you. Are you a caregiver to a child living with cancer? What is the greatest challenge in accessing healthcare? That hashtag is new normal. Makumbi says anti-cancer drugs are too costly and some are inaccessible. Thank you, Makumbi. Another here from Paul Brown, who says the Lord always makes provisions in great and amazing ways. Paul, tell us more, but amen to that. Nikatom, my child had rare form of childhood cancer called retinoblastoma at 9 months in 2008. It was marked by a white reflecting spot in the eye that seemed harmless. We made a difficult decision of removing the affected eye and replaced it with an eye prosthesis. She's now 12 years old and doing just fine. With cancer, I learned that speed in diagnosis is of the essence. Okay, that's very true, Nika. Thank you for sharing. Elishiba Mudoni says, God's mercy upon you parents. Thank you. Thank you for being supportive and watching us this morning. And Jeruweru says, it is all about the money, money, money. Yes, it is a very expensive affair. Remember that hashtag is new normal, and you can also reach us using the numbers at the bottom of your screen. We'll be right back.
Your baby's quite active. After I discovered Molfix, I rediscovered my baby. She's jumping and running around.
Well, we call that the Molfix Comfort. Thanks to its elastic side bands, Molfix provides freedom of movement for your baby. All babies deserve a high-quality diaper. You should also try Molfix. Fresh fried ginger has ginger oil, which is good for a healthy living lifestyle. It combines wonderfully on salads, stir fries, when basted on roasted meat, or simply sprinkled on your favorite dish. Now available in 250 ml, 500 ml, and 1 liter.
Yeyote unataka kumake dream zake zikam true, tutawak na wewe kuzitimiza kwa urahisi. Hii ndio Africanacity. Hii ni Absa.
Kila Jumapili mle NTV Weekendi, mule nitakuwemo. Chanjo ni mbili. Kwanza tutibu lugha kwa daftari la lugha, kisha tupige darubini ya bara.
Na kila siku ya Jumatatu ni mimi wako kwenye kigoda chako. Niite Salim Swale, mzee wa maswali, majibu wanayo viongozi wako.
Nami hapa ni Kaltun Jama, hapa ni kazi tu. Jamani, jasho langu ni kutambua jasho lako kila siku ya Jumanne. Hakika korona imeleta giza, lakini utapata nuru kila Jumatano kwenye kona ya afya, nami Nuru Abdul Aziz.
Katika jungu kuu la spoti tunakupikia michezo bila mchezo na kukupakulia ni wajibu wangu mimi mwana spoti Yoshua Makori. Tuonana Alhamisi.
Umekuwa ni mwaka wa firirinda, nami Frida Mwaka nitadokoa udaku wa maisha wasanii, kisha nizibe mkonga na malimwengu ya walibwende.
Mambo yatakuwa mufti, mie Lofti Matambo nikiwa mitamboni. Mambo ya sasa na ya kitambo tutayapigia gumzo kila sato.
AMRC's objectives are aligned with the government's affordable housing pillar of the Big Four agenda. Visit any of the participating financial institutions today and start your home ownership journey. Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company, unlocking liquidity for affordable housing.
Thank you for staying with us. My name is Gladys Gachanja. The conversation, childhood cancers, still with Esther, Dr. Moko. We're also joined by Dr. Karimi and, of course, Louise Indimuli from home. Thank you guys for being part of this conversation and being so candid, because there are many others who are watching, not only getting encouraged, but also learning a lot about childhood cancers. Now, even as I am posing the question to you, remember, are you a caregiver? What are the greatest challenges around accessing healthcare for your child? That hashtag is new normal. I'd like to hear from those that have walked this journey. Let me start with Louise. What has been the greatest obstacle?
Of course, the obvious one is finances, obviously. But then I like to get a bit more granular. I think one thing that at some point you get to learn is that information is more important than actually money. And by that I mean, we were very blessed to have Dr. Karimi, because what she did was she gave us a whole roadmap of like the whole treatment, and that sort of settles you down and gives you an idea of what you need to prepare for. Initially, we were very bleak, so I think the first obstacle would be when you get this diagnosis and you have no access to information, which if you don't know what you are treating or what you need to do, it's even more scary, over and above the financial bit. Another obstacle, of course, is that these children need lots of blood transfusions, and then even more precarious, they need lots of platelets transfusion, which is very expensive. So each time they get a platelet transfusion, the cost would be about 44,000, 50,000 shillings, and sometimes you'd be told you need 3 of those packets, so that's now 120 within just one particular, and that's just for the platelets. And then what you also need to know is that the screening process for platelets alone is very exhaustive, takes a whole day. So we had to have a waiting list of friends and colleagues who not only match your child's blood, but also are willing to stay in hospital for a whole day just to be screened and then to also get the platelets, and then, you know, hoping that it matches and that there's no reaction, because if there is, then you need a transfusion and then you get more platelets. So the whole blood system in Kenya and the whole platelet system still needs a bit of tweaking to make it more, I would say, efficient, because that's a very huge obstacle, because blood is important. When they need blood, when the blood count is low and they need blood, that becomes an emergency. So we learned to manage that process with our small support group, and we had a team of people whose job was simply just to keep screening our friends and colleagues and telling them, guys, please be on standby in case we need the platelets. So I would list them down and say, you know, as much as finances is a very huge issue, but then the mechanics of what do you need to do, I think that's even more crucial, and I think that's even more helpful for parents to understand. Information is power, especially when you're treating cancer, because it gives you a roadmap and you're more confident in whatever that you're going to do. And so I would say the finances, the blood, and the support system. It's sometimes, if you don't know where to look, you can feel very, very alone. Not alone is a very huge obstacle for most parents, just feeling like they're in this thing by themselves.
Okay, and Esther, you come from Gilgil. You had to come to Nairobi to access healthcare for all. Are we saying we don't have specialists around your area in Nakuru County?
Unfortunately, we don't. So we were seeing a really good pediatrician in Nakuru, but he couldn't treat the leukemia. So he referred us to Gertrude's, where we got Al's treatment. And because at the time, I think when we started, we were not as lucky. Well, lucky here is an oxymoron, referring to Louis' experience. When they started their treatment, they were able to access outpatient like daycare. You can go in and come out, go home, living in Nairobi. But for us, we had to be admitted all the time in Gertrude's, and which escalates the financial burden. And driving up and down, like facing the highway, and especially those interludes where you had to go back home for taking breaks from the chemo, and then maybe you've gone to work or you've gone to the market and you come back and the child is having like a 40 degrees fever, and you have to just go like crazy on the road to try and get him help. So there is a really, really huge gap in cancer care, and it's really not accessible to a lot of people. I count myself lucky, again, lucky quote unquote, sorry, because I was able to access care in a good facility, and also be in a position to even manage to move from one place to the other, like from Gilgil to Nairobi. There are a lot of families who can't do that. They can't afford even the fare, the transport to where they can access care, either in Eldoret or in Nairobi. So it is a huge challenge, lack of facilities.
Dr. Moko, ENT surgeon, most often than not, your patients are also kids, right? And now dealing with your own child who needs access to healthcare, and there's very little and very few specialists, you know, that deal with this. Was your experience similar to Louise's and Esther's, or being a doctor, you know where to go, what to do?
Initially, okay, it's the biggest challenge for doctors is that, for me, it was because I had the knowledge, and so I could not fit into the normal support group system in the country, because given my gap, like when I first found out the diagnosis, I was in a church support group, and I found that a lot of people on the side would give me suggestions that were not what is expected. You know, the cultural beliefs now start kicking in, and you'll find people telling you, try this medication, try giving your child these herbs, and there's somebody else who wants you to try prayers. And for me, the biggest problem was fitting into the normal groups, and so I found myself in a childhood cancer survivor support group system based in America. because at least they had information, they had gone through it, and so they had more power. And that is where I found my comfort, because nobody else could understand at my level. And for me, that is very important. Just as Louise is saying, information is very important. And so what I try even in my day-to-day practice is to give the parents that I come across, or my patients, as much information as possible about their condition and how the journey is expected to be. I give them a snapshot because I was once there. It is also very confusing because you think as a parent, you don't think as a doctor at that time. And when you want to think as a doctor, you don't want to make a mistake. And lucky for me, I had my former school teacher. I trained in Moi Teaching and Referral Hospital. And the first thing I did is I called him. He's an oncologist. He's called Dr. Njuguna. And I asked him, I told him, my son has this. What do you think I should do? And he just told me, he referred me to Professor Macharia in Aga Khan Hospital. And having seen my teacher or Dr. Njuguna treat children with nephroblastoma and get cured, I had hope in the referral that he gave me. And so thankfully, Professor Macharia was also very helpful to me. He was like a father to me, and he could talk to me at the level of a doctor and at the same time as a mother. And so the way he related to me was a bit different. Of course, I met other patients or other mothers to other patients who had nephroblastoma, who gave me hope, and we walked through the journey. And yeah, as Louise has also said, blood is a big problem. It is not an exception, even for those of us who have different forms of cancer. Cancer treatment basically depletes the bone marrow in the body. And so whether or not you're being treated for kidney cancer or blood cancer, your blood is going to go down. So we also needed a lot of transfusions, a lot of platelets. And that is a gap in our system. Whether you're in Aga Khan, whether you're in Kenyatta, sometimes you have to get donors to come and donate for you. And so the support system, the whole family setup, having people around you who you know you can call and they'll come within a minute or two and donate blood for your child is actually a very important thing. And so it's not any different. Whether you're a doctor or not, the challenges are the same.
Yeah.
And it's not any different.
Okay. I'm glad you're here to give us that perspective, because most often than not, people forget that doctors are human beings going through life just like you, just that they specialized in medicine. Now, Dr. Karemi, in a world, especially in our context, Kenya, where blood donations have been very few and far between, and even blood has been scarce, especially in this pandemic, how has that affected the treatment of these children suffering from cancer?
All right. So I always say that majority of the time, the treatment of cancer is actually very pegged on the supportive care that you're giving your patient. What limits the intensity with which you can actually give that treatment is that supportive care, which includes infection control and blood support. So majority of the time you find a lot of the patients are grappling with issues of blood, and in Kenya we have such a huge scarcity of blood. So you notice we have to keep relying on families to get donors. We have to rely on people of goodwill. And I really put out that message. You've had most of the caregivers here really talking about the availability of blood. So really, let's go out there, let's donate. You don't know who you're helping somebody to really save a life, and let's help these children with cancer.
Okay, and even as we talk about the treatment centers and even the support centers in this country, they are also very few and far between. There is a Gertrude's Hospital. We also have another one at the Kenyatta National Hospital. MTRH, do we have another one there for kids?
Yes. We do. Actually, the two big centers for childhood cancer treatment in the public sector are Kenyatta National Hospital and Moi and Teaching and Referral Hospital. But there's a plan from the national government to actually decentralize cancer care, and there are a few other centers that have come up I know there's some treatment going on in Kisii, and in Kisii Teaching and Referral Hospital. There's hope that maybe Jaramogi Oginga Odinga Teaching and Referral Hospital will also get that, Garissa, Mombasa, but this is still work in progress. So again, you can see it's such a challenge if a parent has to live all the way from Garissa, from Mombasa, from West Pokot to come and access even just simple diagnostics. Because if you don't diagnose cancer, you really can't treat it. So there's a real big challenge of diagnosing, and you remember with early diagnosis means we can save lives. So we really need to rethink how we can be able to change that statistic that only 20% of our patients survive, and yet in the rest of the world or the high income countries, really they have almost 80 to 90% cure.
Okay, and now back to the wellness of this child that is suffering from cancer. Penina here says, please ask Dr. Karemi, when is the best time to break the news to the child as to what they're dealing with?
I really love that question from Penina, because that borders on how do you break bad news? And children always have parents, and that's where we start off. We get the parents to first get to understand what is going on with their child. What is the diagnosis? What are you going to do about it? And always remember, as a doctor, there's always hope. Give hope. In as much as you're giving devastating news, give them hope. Then you initially make sure they understand and you prepare them, because most parents really break down. They feel guilty. They want to protect their children. And one of the advice I always tell them is, please bring in the child. We'll bring in this child when you're first comfortable about it. We work with child life specialists. They are sort of psychologists. And what they do is that together we work to help the child understand what is wrong with me. As you noticed, as all these caregivers were talking, is children progressively will understand different things at different stages. So sometimes at 2 years, all you say is there's some ouchie in your body, and that's all we need to deal with. As they get older, they start understanding, oh, mommy, I need to take these medicines to get stronger, to be better, to be a strong man like daddy. You keep taking them through the steps, and whatever they understand, you give them. Also, a lot of the children will draw their strength from the parents. So if the parents are breaking down, you have to deal with that so that they then have that reassurance that, yes, I'm in a difficult situation, but I know mommy and daddy look really strong about it, and I'm going to make it. So taking into consideration, don't leave the children in the dark. Don't feel like if they know their cancer diagnosis, you're making things worse. Let's break it down in a language, using imagery, and always give hope. Always to the parents, to the children, give them that reassurance that, yes, it's a difficult situation, but we are doing something about it, and you are the champion right here with us. And you're really doing very great. That form of positive energy sort of gives these parents such a positive spirit. And I love it that we put them in patient support group. I think you've had most of these caregivers really talking about it. Because when you have Louis going and telling another parent, my child, I was in this condition on this day, one time with my child. And you notice he holds that parent's hand, and he can tell you he has held so many parents' hands on their first day of devastation. And the only thing they remember, they don't even remember me. They actually remember only Louis telling them, I was here, I went through it, I can make it. Esther telling them how to get blood, how to plan their resources, what to do with fever. A doctor can talk that over and over. But when a parent tells them, they really understand it. And then coming together because they are wearers of that shoe and putting it into perspective. And actually, that's so amazing. And so patient support groups is a really, really important aspect of the psychosocial care, not only of parents, but even their children.
And talking about psychosocial care, Dr. Moko, that is, you mentioned that this took a toll on you. How did you handle it, considering your day-to-day is medicine, but you also have a child here that you're catering for that has this chronic illness?
It is difficult, But I think the most important is a good support group. At that time, I was undergoing my master's. So I was always in Kenyatta. For a moment, I didn't want to see sick children because I would see a sick child and I would take a bathroom break and go and cry because it would remind me of my sick child at home. But with time, as Dr. Karimi says, you have to be strong. And you draw your strength from the people around you. So you surround yourself with positive people. I had a very supportive husband. I have a very supportive husband who was there for me. I have my parents. I have my parents on both sides. They were all there for me. My siblings. Most of my siblings were on speed dial to come and donate blood and platelets. And the fact that I am a firstborn, I always made sure that I organized them and I told them this is what will be required, and so you on this day you need to be on standby and you need to be around Aga Khan Hospital. Also, the doctor who treats your child sort of becomes your pillar of strength because you rely on what the doctor has to say. So sometimes you're on the other side and they're looking at the computer and they're looking at the blood results. You want to read their facial expression and deduct if you're expecting good news or bad news. And but the most important is that the hope. The hope is what kept me going, knowing that and the information. Hope for me came in form of the knowledge and the information I had. In spite of my son having stage 4 cancer, I knew that there's a 93% chance that he will get cured. And so I held on to that hope. I prayed, I believed in God, and I knew that it was going to happen. So a positive support system and having knowledge and the hope is what keeps you going. And at the end of it all, it teaches you lessons. For me, the greatest lesson was empathy. I think having gone through that, it makes me a very different kind of doctor. I think I'm very empathetic. Sometimes I find myself even following up patients who probably, think that I've forgotten about them, but I keep asking, how is that child doing? And it's a good thing because I think it makes me who I am. And so I find myself very attached to most of my patients, and I always want to give my best. Maybe sometimes it depletes me in terms of my energy, but there's always God who fills you up when you give.
Okay. Now for you, Esther, it has been quite an up and down season for you and a lot of low moments, as you had mentioned. When it got really, really dark, who was your pillar?
Okay, I've always had a group of girls around me, so who were there from the beginning. The day I got the news, I sent one of them a message, and within half an hour, I had like 20 girls, friends from childhood, from adulthood, who have been there and taking different roles. Some of them would go to Gilgil, stay with my son. Some of them would come to Gertrude's and decide you're going to get a day off. So they would organize amongst themselves and my cousins as well, to stay with Al and maybe take me for lunch and just give me those few minutes to breathe. And one particular person came in really, really handy, like a sister, Dr. Beatrice Cabera of Gertrude's. She is a scientist, she's the pathologist, and she also went to Moi, maybe Dr. you know her. And so she was wearing two hats, the hat of being a friend and the hat of being a doctor. So she broke down the information to me. She explained to me when things were really tough, like a few times Al went into heart failure and he was in ICU, and she would break it down to me in a way with tough love, like, this is the situation, this is what we do, then the rest we leave to God. Even when I was in India, I would call her anytime in the middle of the night. And yes, the doctors are explaining to me, the specialist, but I would still go to her, Daktari, this is not, I wouldn't call her Daktari, I'd be like, my Kairi, to my girl, this is what the doctors are saying. Can you explain it to me? And she even flew to India to come and have a sitting with me to understand the stem cell transplant process.
Yeah.
So she held me through that journey. Yes, I appreciate everyone, but she stood out in that sense because she understood it from the science and also from being a mother, being a friend, being a sister. And she made a huge, huge difference in that journey for me.
Now, Louise, for men, it's a little bit different because being vulnerable is not your forte, but now you're going through this reality and you need all hands on deck. How did you handle it? How are you handling it?
Yeah, you're right. In fact, something that makes me sad sometimes is that when in our group, I told you we've got a very close-knit group of caregivers, parents with kids with cancer. One sad thing is that there's not so many men. And in fact, this one, I remember the doctors just, gave us the hard news that sometimes men don't deal with it so well. Sadly, in some cases, they literally that's the first time they're seen in hospital and then they just disappear. That's when now sometimes, they go into blaming the mother about the situation. So the sad reality is that and I feel sad saying this, that we are the exception and not the general rule, because that's a time when the family needs you the most. But looking back, I can understand where that anxiety comes from. It's because the first thing we think about is the finances, and then we wonder, where do we even begin? Then, of course, as you've rightfully said, men, we tend to kind of bottle things up. So I think what helped me personally, I've got a very supportive family, extended family, both on my side and Mama Zuri's side. Literally, we were never alone in hospital. There was always, I think even Dr. Karemi attended many of those impromptu prayer circles at Gertrude's every evening, having coffee and saying a prayer. And I never really felt alone. I think one would feel alone at night when everyone else has gone home, and then Zuri and the mom are in hospital. And Zuri's second born is at my mother's now, her shows. And then when you go home, I do recall a very dark period that up to now, sometimes I look back and I don't even know how I managed to come out of it because of really being alone. But what also helped me, and I can say this with all confidence, is that I knew it was much harder on Zuri's mother than on myself, because moms really, really feel the pain. We have got our own small little battles about finances and planning and so on and so forth. Something else I have to say, now that I'm in a public forum, when we had our pay bill up, I really need to thank people that I don't even know. I remember we would get contributions from as little as even 100 shillings. And for me, why the small amounts used to matter to me more, not really more, but they're very, very keen for me, is that someone chose to send, maybe that person, that's all that they had. So that feeling of people, strangers rallying behind us really told me, just get your head in it, just try, focus, don't lose hope. So yeah, the support system is very, very important. Sadly, I think also maybe we need to be a bit more proactive about caregiver counseling, like Dr. said. But then also know that what also helps most is when parents see other parents of children who are thriving, which is why we do what we do in our small circle. We have heroes who gained their wins, and we always honor them. But we also celebrate those who are still with us, so that other parents who inevitably will get the same diagnosis. I do remember the difference in demeanor when the weekend I went to hospital to visit them, and they had just met a gentleman called Ron, who's like our local hero as well. So Mama Ron just went with Ron and to the ward, and they were like, by the way, Mama Zuri, guess what, this is Ron. He's also getting better. Look how tall and big he is. And I do recall the difference in the atmosphere in the ward when I entered that room, how Mama Zuri was optimistic, she was animated, like, by the way, guess what, this thing is doable. I do remember that switch. That's why we do what we do. Like we tell, so I tell in my group, just give me all the men. Let me help guide them about how to, one, navigate around the finances up and apale. Of course, we do the solution, but if we just say, don't worry, everything will be okay, You can look for this option, NHIF, pay for the whole year, so you have cover for both yourself and the mother of the child, have 12 cycles in a year, go to this organization. That normally helps.
Okay, and even as we're talking about being part of a bigger community, the experience of working with Al for 4 years has also, or you've allowed yourself to open up and help others along. Talk about that and how it is important to know that there are resources out there to help those that are walking in the same shoes.
Yes, I think the biggest challenge is information, and that's why I feel that I should give information. Like how to access things like NHIF, which sometimes can be really, really tricky if you have no idea where to get the money, how to set up fundraisers, and also how to knowing what to expect on the journey, because no one, okay, for me, from the medical point of view, at first I did not have a lot of information, but once I got to know, oh, you should expect a fever, you should expect this and that, then I knew how to look after my son better. And also, like, not to be afraid that your child is undergoing cancer treatment. Push for what you need. I remember, like, during lockdown, I am heading to Nairobi for a transfusion, and there's a queue at the roadblock. You have a child who needs a blood transfusion like yesterday. And I one time did what Kenyans do best, overlap. So I overlapped and got to the front of the queue, and I'm trying to explain to the authorities involved there that I have a really sick child, and unfortunately, at that time, Al wasn't looking sick unless you knew that he's sick. And they're telling me, "Oyu mtoto ni mgonjwa wapi?" And I'm like, this is a really sick child, and I can give you the doctor's number, I have the letters, and you really must let me go. You know, like, just being firm and pushing for what is best for your child is really important. And even when you go, like when we were going to the passport office and there's a queue and they keep telling you, oh, go back, you have to really fight, you have to really stand firm. And even at the doctor's office, Dr. Karimi is really, really good. She explains everything to you, but sometimes when it's explained to you, you don't understand. Ask the doctor to break it down to you, to tell you what it is. And also, networking with other people, I think that is important, because as Louise has said, Babazuri, there is a Mama Claudine, who gave me hope. She came, like in the early days of 2017, she came with her child holding her hand and showed me pictures of Claudine at her worst, and that gave me hope. So giving hope to other people, that is also very important, because some of them have maybe just heard that there's something like this, but they have never really seen a real person go through it. And for childhood cancer, it is, a lot of people do not know. Like yesterday, I got a taxi when I came from Gilgil to the place I was going to sleep, and I asked the driver, and he said, what do you mean children get cancer? Watoto hawapati cancer? And I said, they actually do. So when people actually understand this, they are better positioned to help you. Yeah, and you get to know that there are a lot of really kind and good people, like Louise has said, in terms of fundraising. People who would just call you because they have seen your posts on the social media, appealing for money, appealing for blood. They tell you, Mama, sina cha kukupea, I have nothing to offer you, but I'll pray for you. And things will be better. They do not know you, they know your story, they know what you're going through, they understand it, and they give you a word of encouragement. So that I really value, and that's what I would like to give other people, hope.
Okay. Now, if there is another partner that should have been on this panel but could not make it, is the Faraja Cancer Trust that has worked with many childhood cancer cases. Dr. Moko, perhaps in 30 seconds, talk about the importance of partnering with such people who give these services for free.
Okay, last weekend, which was my son's birthday, we did something special for his birthday. I am the organizing secretary of a group called the Subi Queens. We're just a society of ladies who want, with an aim of giving back to society. And we decided to, or I pushed the agenda for them to partner with Faraja and spread out the word on childhood cancer. We had our first event last weekend at Uhuru Park, where we did childhood cancer awareness. We raised funds for Faraja. Faraja is a cancer trust that deals with cancer for both adults and children, and it is based at MP Shah Hospital. That is where their office is, but they support children from all hospitals, including private and government hospitals. They have a support program in Kenyatta National Hospital and also in Moi Teaching and Referral Hospital. We also tried to donate, we asked people to come and donate blood, and we managed to get some blood that was taken back to Kenyatta National Hospital. For Faraja, they have a variety of things that they do. They have support groups, both for the caregivers and also for the patients themselves. For the children, they have a art and crafts program, something which they call distraction therapy. So they have music, dance, art and crafts that helps engage the children while in hospital. And they also have the financial aspect where they help families that are undergoing treatment. They help bridge the gap. NHIF does not cater for all the costs, so Faraja can come in and pay for half the amount, and then the other half the amount is paid by NHIF. For those patients who are in Moi Teaching and Referral Hospital, for a long time they didn't have access to radiotherapy, so Faraja organizes for them and organizes for how they can be hosted in Nairobi while they are undergoing the radiotherapy treatment. And so it is one of the core. I have seen Faraja in Kenyatta, I have seen Faraja in Moi Teaching and Referral Hospital, and it's one of the trusts that is really key in helping people who have cancer access care and also giving them hope.
Okay, now I have to leave it at that. I'm already in trouble in terms of my timing here, but hey, that information is very important, especially for those who do not know where to start. Again, I thank you all for being part of this conversation, starting with Dr. Doreen Karemi, pediatric hematologist and oncologist at the Gertrude's Children's Hospital, Dr. Weri Moko, caregiver, nephroblastoma, Esther Mwangi, also a caregiver, and of course, Louise Indimuli, who is a caregiver. Thank you for being part of this conversation. And tomorrow we take a look at women and inheritance. Now, does the African society recognize the right of a girl child when it comes to inheritance? What does the law say about it? And how can you as a woman safeguard this right? Victor Kiprop will be steering that conversation from 7 a.m. See you then.
Presenting the new Harpic Bathroom Cleaner. Compared to ordinary detergents, its thick formulation gives you superior cleaning and kills 99.9% of germs and viruses all around the bathroom. Blue for the toilet and red for the bathroom.
Hello, my name is Nihala Barasa and welcome to Learn in a Minute. Have you ever walked into a yoga class, a Zumba class, an aerobics class, or a spin class, the one with perceived riding of bicycles? What is the one common factor for all these classes? More often than not, you'll find that these classes are attended largely by women. Are you also a beginner in fitness? trying to look into joining a fitness activity and a little intimidated and shy about the weightlifting section and being lonely at the gym? Well, it is highly recommended that as a woman, shy, intimidated, and wanting to know what happens in the fitness world, to join a group activity because they are more social, they are more friendly, you are more likely to make companions there, and this will get you in the fitness mode. This has been Learn in a Minute, and I am Mihala Barasa.
Accountability and ownership is not very clear.
NYS is a place where people go and steal money, and that money disappears. We never talk about it again.
A lot of theft has taken place after the handshake. ODM people after the handshake, they see no evil, they hear no evil.
When things are not right, we question.
Financial data in Kenya is